Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by La Trobe University and CSIRO. My name is Darren Coomber. I'm with the Research Innovation Precinct at La Trobe University, and I'll just wait about 30 seconds because I can see the number of participants still joining us. So if you just bear with me, I will commence proceedings in just a minute. Great, thank you. It looks like we've got most of our participants have joined us today. So welcome again, everybody, and welcome to the joint webinar between La Trobe University and CSIRO. My name is Darren Coomber with the Research Innovation Precinct at La Trobe University. I'm joined today by my colleague, Lauren Giusti. La Trobe University acknowledges that this event and our participants are based on the lands of many traditional custodians in Australia. We recognise the ongoing connection to the land and value the unique contribution to the university and the wider Australian society of the traditional owners. Here in Melbourne, I live and work on the lands of the Wurundjeri people and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present of these lands. La Trobe Uni, through our Research Innovation Precinct, brings together industry, academia and community to create new products and services in areas of agriculture, food and environment, health and wellbeing and digital transformation. It's been a pleasure to partner with CSIRO now over a year or so, delivering a series of webinars exploring the future of agriculture and food along the entire supply chain and looking at new opportunities that are driven by advances in technology, by industry challenges and by consumer needs. And I'm really pleased it's the fourth in our webinar series. We've got a great group of speakers for you today, coming to you from 3 different cities, 2 countries and 3 time zones. And I'm really pleased that we have people attending the webinar today from at least 7 countries. So thank you all for taking the time. We know that there's a global demand for more protein. We know that consumers want that protein to be produced more sustainably, and we want that protein to come from a wider variety of sources to meet that demand. Our speakers today will highlight consumer research and the acceptance of new protein products and the practical challenges that have to be overcome in the development, the scale up and the commercialization of plant protein ingredients and products. After each presentation, we'll have some time for questions, and feel free to put questions at any time in either the Q&A function or in the chat. The Q&A function will be easier for Lauren and I to moderate. And we will make available to people the recording of the webinar afterwards. Now, I would like to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Shanae Golly, who's joining us from Adelaide in South Australia. We had a few technical hitches, and no, Shanae, I can actually see you. The hitches were on our end, so that's fantastic. I can breathe again.
Me too.
Shanae's a member of the Behavioural Science Research Team at CSIRO's Human Health Program, and her recent research is focused on understanding the psychosocial drivers of community acceptance of novel foods, of food components and new or disruptive food technologies. So Shanae, I'll hand over to you now to give your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Darren. Can everybody hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Also say thank you to the organisers of this afternoon's event for the opportunity to share some of our recent work on consumer acceptance of complementary proteins. Do we have the slide decks up and running, or is that shared?
Yes, I'll share them now.
Oh, thank you. There we go. So while the title of the presentation is What Do Consumers Think? With my background in psychology, I think it's also important to ask, how do complementary proteins make consumers feel? So the distinction between thoughts and feelings are going to be a theme today for my presentation, so please bear with me. If we could have the next slide, please. As Darren has already outlined, I think we're all very aware of the challenge. So with a growing population, we're going to need to produce more protein more sustainably, and complementary sources of protein could play a key role. But for these to realise the potential impact they can have in terms of food security and environmental sustainability, consumer acceptance and uptake is going to be key. We could have the next slide, please. So based on consumer trends, you would think perhaps that consumer acceptance would not be an issue for complementary proteins. On one hand, we're seeing dietary patterns shift towards a conscious reduction in animal protein consumption. And we also hear about the rise of the conscious consumer. So where individuals are making purchase decisions that are in line with values such as sustainability, the environment, ethical practices, and animal welfare. But there is a paradox. If we could click forward one, please. Which I think this report heading from Harvard Business Review captures, and that is something that has become the focus of recent research that CSIRO and our collaborators have been doing in this space. The elusive green consumer talks of the disconnect between what people tell us is important to them and the types of characteristics they want to see in products, and what actually happens when they get to the supermarket or point of purchase. But we could, next slide, please. And the reason for this is that predicting consumer food choice behavior is actually very difficult because it's very complex and influenced by many different factors. So on screen is a very simplified version of a psychosocial model of food choice behavior that we use as a basis for the research that we conduct. The components outlined in red characterize the primary focus of the research that I do and the research that I'm going to talk a bit about today. So as you can see, people's attitudes towards foods, food products, food ingredients are influenced by many different factors. There are those relating to the individuals, so differences in their preferences, their values, and their personality. There are also factors relating to the food itself, so what it tastes like and what it looks like, for example. And then there are broader social or economic factors like price and availability. And all of these come to play in various levels, and they're going to influence what a person thinks and subsequently their intentions, so how willing they report they are to consume or purchase products. And as I've already mentioned, though, there can be a disconnect between what people say they do and what they actually do when they get to the supermarket. And this is referred to as the intention behavior gap. And I read somewhere on this topic recently that when we're asked what we think, we respond as citizens. So we all agree that the environment and sustainability and animal welfare are incredibly important. But when we are purchasing and faced with multiple options, or we're time poor or distracted, or our circumstances change our priorities, our intentions can sometimes be derailed and we choose what we are more familiar with, which can be a real hurdle for uptake of new or novel products. We could just click forward one, please. So it is in this intention behavior gap that we've recently conducted a piece of research that I'm going to share today, but we've also done some work, we click forward again, which looks at novel ways of categorizing consumers to better understand the barriers to uptake. We go to the next slide. So as I forewarned, I'm going to be talking about feelings. So a lot of consumer research, including the research that I do, uses methods such as focus groups and questionnaires that access the conscious level or system 2 to understand what consumers think and the levels of acceptance. And these insights are subsequently used to drive the development of products for market. But from our understanding of how people process information, all of the heavy lifting and the decision making may be happening subconsciously. So system 1, represented there by Homer, especially when we're investigating acceptance of novel or unfamiliar products. So system 1, which is sometimes referred to as our intuition or as our gut feeling, is often overlooked when we investigate consumer acceptance. And it's been suggested, though, that this may go some way in explaining that intention behavior gap. So have the next slide, please. So the remaining part of this presentation, I'm going to be outlining some of the key findings from a recent collaborative study that we conducted with NTU in Singapore and the team led by Professor Mei Luing. In that study, we investigated both the thoughts and feelings of participants towards 4 complementary protein sources. One of the key characteristics of that participant sample was that 50% were consciously reducing the dietary intake of red meat, so in line with that global trend I talked about earlier. But it's important to keep this in mind as we go through the remaining slides, and as a caveat in general as to how representative the findings may be for the general population. The next slide, please. So the study actually had 3 separate components, but for today's presentation, I'm just going to focus on the findings from the implicit association test. So this is the methodology that we use to measure participants' subconscious responses to complementary protein sources, and what we found through the survey component of the study. So this is where we measured what people think and the psychosocial drivers of acceptance or unacceptance. So we had the opportunity here to compare responses that we got at the implicit or that subconscious level and also the conscious level. And because we ran the study concurrently in Singapore, we were also able to examine cross-cultural differences as well. We have the next slide. So this slide summarizes the findings from the Australian cohort for the IAT component, specifically the condition where we compared responses to plant versus animal protein. So this is a reaction time task where we measure how long it takes participants to complete a categorization task. So response times on these tasks are reported to reveal how strongly associated concepts are at the unconscious level. So in these graphs that are on screen, the longer bars indicate stronger subconscious associations between that characteristic, whether it's positive or negative, and the paired protein type. Plant proteins here, the bars are in green and animal proteins are in gray. So what you can see is that there are stronger associations for positive characteristics and plant proteins, particularly characteristics like it's nourishing and sustainable, compared to when those same characteristics are paired with animal protein products. The opposite being true when the characteristics presented are less desirable. But I think it's worth pointing out, if you look to the bottom of the graph on the left, you can see that products containing animal protein were actually seen as more natural than plant-based products. And this theme is continued out through findings in subsequent components of the study as well. We can have the next slide. So this slide summarizes the high-level findings from the IAT. So we also investigated subconscious responses to products containing cultured or cell-based protein, and also the overall responses on this task between Australia and Singapore. So as you can see, Australians are more open to the idea of cultured meat compared to Singaporeans, but we saw a strong preference for plant-based protein in Australia that was not replicated in the Singapore sample. Next slide. And finally, we're back on topic. So here we are, we're looking at what consumers actually think about complementary proteins. So we found cross-cultural differences in willingness to consume depending on the type of protein. So you can see that plant-based protein received highest levels of acceptance in both countries. It's Australia represented by the blue bars and Singapore with the red. There were also cross-cultural differences in perceived risks and benefits associated with increasing the presence of complementary proteins in the food supply. So both Australians and Singaporeans did see potential benefits such as better nutrition, food quality, and food safety. But as you can see, the risks were more of an issue in Singapore, but not non-existent in the Australian cohort. Next slide, please. I'm actually going to finish on this slide. It's a really busy one. It might take me a little while to go through it. But in the questionnaire, we also presented to participants a range of scales that measured individual level differences in variables that we thought could explain why people would be more or less accepting of complementary proteins. The table summarizes a series of regression models that were tested. The highlighted boxes indicate that the variable explained a significant amount of variance in participants' willingness to consume protein from each of the 4 sources that we investigated. The symbols inside the boxes indicate the nature of the relationship. So if we're looking at plant-based proteins specifically, if a participant scored higher in meat attachment, for example, or food technology neophobia, they tended to be less willing to consume. Meat attachment, I'm not sure if people are familiar with the scale, but it measures attitudes that a meal is not considered substantial or enjoyable if it does not contain a portion of animal protein. Interestingly, you can see green consumption values and a desire for naturalness were both significantly negatively associated with willingness to consume plant protein, but it was a significant factor in willingness to consume the other complementary proteins. And here we have the rise of that green or conscious consumer again. So in summary, before I finish and sort of open up to some questions, in terms of what consumers think about complementary proteins or what might be the key barriers to uptake, there seems to be concerns around the naturalness of products containing complementary proteins, which we saw in both the questionnaire and also the IA2 responses. And there may also be challenges in encouraging some segments of the community to try new or novel foods or foods made with novel ingredients. So there is a challenge out there that I'm sure we're all up to. Thank you. Have the final slide.
Great, thank you very much, Shanae. Consumers, my goodness.
They're tricky.
They're very tricky. So we sort of demand like for like, but when we find out that the like for like is not animal, we don't want it. So there's they're tough. I guess it's the different segments of consumers that we have to deal with. I have just a couple of questions that people put in the Q&A for you, Shanae, and one was that they noticed that fungi-based proteins were not included in the study. Did you study those at all, or do you put them under plant-based proteins?
No, we didn't include those in that particular study. I suppose what we wanted to do was to pick some that would be more or less familiar to consumers. So we tried to get that that spectrum, and I'd say even the marine algae we put in, originally wasn't in the project design. So yeah, there are obviously other ones, and to be honest, the profile of acceptance does differ. So it would be interesting to include that in any future research that we do.
Great. And I have another question talking about the positive negative slide and talking about meat as being both natural and more artificial. What I might get you to do, Shanae, is you can type your answer to that whilst the next speaker is talking, because I think that's going to be more than a 20-second response to Scott's question. And I guess, Shanae, the other thought in my head is where price comes into the consumer model, which is that ability to scale plant protein products to drop the price to make them either comparable to meat or less than meat. Will that change the consumer mindset?
Yeah, I think when consumers are faced with multiple options, some pragmatic decision points, and price might be one of those, as well as I said, familiarity. So I think price point is going to be a key one, where if everything is the same, then there's going to have to be a point of difference, which is going to help people to make decisions to which product out of the many on the shelf they're going to go with. So
Great.
It can become comparable. There's one less hurdle for consumers to jump over.
Think through. Great. Thank you very much, Shanae. And I'm going to move on now to our next speaker. So our second speaker today is Dr. Aparna Venkatesh, who's joining us from Singapore. Hello, Aparna. Hi. Again.
Hello.
Aparna is the Collaborative Innovation Lead at Beulah for Southeast Asia and Oceania. And in that role, Aparna leads the innovation strategy in emerging opportunities for sustainable foods, and she scouts for novel agri-food technology applications with external partners. Aparna, I just found out, joined in December with Beulah and spent a decade working with ASTAR, which is the Singapore Agency for Science, Technology and Research, which is a fantastic organisation, having been there a few times. And as head of ASTAR Enterprises Agri-Food and Nutrition Division, Aparna played a key role in supporting the scientific, business, regulatory and strategy aspects of building up Singapore's alternative protein capabilities, enabling local food production as part of the nation's food resilience agenda, which is a fantastic, I guess, initiative, which maybe is another webinar around how different countries are looking at their own food sovereignty that we can talk about another time, Aparna. Aparna, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to start by thanking La Trobe University and CSIRO for this opportunity. I think it's a very exciting space and there's a lot happening right now. We're very happy to be at the thick of all the action at Beulah. So a little bit about Beulah. You may or may not be familiar with us, but we play a very significant role in the food industry as a major machine and plant manufacturer for food producers. We're also very involved in the automotive industry through our advanced materials division. And we actually estimate that we're responsible for feeding over 2 billion people every day. This is from our equipment in grain storage and handling, milling, but also in consumer products. A little bit more about the alternative protein market. Some of you may be familiar, some of you may not, so I thought it would be good to give an overview. By 2050, the global population is projected to reach almost 10 billion people, and there is going to be a 70% rise for demand of resource-intensive foods. So business as usual to increase food supply is definitely not an option anymore. So companies will need to collaborate to make a positive impact on the world's climate and nutrition challenges and find more sustainable ways to be able to produce food. So the plant-based meat market barely existed 10 years ago, and now it's almost around 1 to 3% of the $2 trillion USD meat market, and this is projected to hit almost 10% in 2025. That's huge. So traditional meat intake may be overtaken in the future with various other forms of alternative proteins. This was touched upon in the previous presentation, such as cultured meat, with plant-based meat close behind traditional meat. This is not going to just be driven by consumer interest, but also by necessity. If we want to be able to feed over 10 billion people by 2025 within the boundaries of our planet. Now, Asia is the source of a lot of proteins and raw materials that is needed to make the products, and business must obviously be near where their source is. So globally, alternative protein investments actually grew by 60% from 2020 to 2021 to a new record-breaking total of 5 billion. All these stats are from GFI, and they're a great resource for anyone interested to know more. You can have a look at their website. They have fantastic data up there. So zooming in on Asia Pacific, we actually see similarly robust year-over-year growth in alternative proteins, jumping from 162 million in 2020 to almost 312 billion in 2021. And among 2021's most eye-popping hauls were Singaporean startup Next Gen Foods. They actually raised 30 million seed funding. And we also have V2 Food in Australia that raised 110 million last year alone. In short, these figures really show clearly more than ever that this is the time in Asia Pacific to build, build, build. I will not spend too much time on this because this was already covered by the previous speaker, but let's start here with the three key reasons. We have health, climate, and animal welfare concern. Cost is also a point that is considered a huge barrier that we see in our industry among consumers. The cost parity is just not there at the moment. Perhaps they want to buy more plant-based products for one of the three key reasons, but they're discouraged by the price difference at this point. So being really able to hit that sweet spot is going to be the holy grail. So if we look at the evolution of the plant-based meat industry over the past couple of decades, you'll see that it started out with meat extenders. These were traditional meat extended with textured plant proteins, and then it moved into more of the tofu and tempeh based products, so grinded and fermented soybeans. This is already hugely popular in China. It has been for several decades now. Next, it moved into more of meat alternatives. So this was not meant to mimic meat, but it was made with vegetables, not trying to mimic meat in the taste and the texture. And then we are now at the stage of what we call plant-based meat products. So these are meant to mimic meat in taste and texture. And these are made out of plant protein concentrates or isolates. So you're actually having a much better nutritional quality as well. And of course, the next generation is cultured meat. This is still in very early stage R&D, but this is going to be based out of cells that are actually taken from the animals. And this market introduction is expected to blossom only in 2030. So we have a long way to go still for the R&D for cultured meat. So a little bit more about what we do here at Bühler in terms of extrusion of alternative proteins. So extrusion is quite a versatile technology, and you can make quite a lot of products. So cold extruded products are preserved by chilling, baking, or drying, whereas extrusion cooking actually destroys contaminating microorganisms, and the dry products have a long shelf life. So in cooking extrusion, applications actually range from breakfast cereals to meat substitutes, from plant-based proteins to pet food. A reconstituted rice is quite interesting. This is where you can actually take the broken rice fragments and reconstitute it into an extruder, while also fortifying it with vitamins to make it more nutritious. So as you can see, there are various different applications that have been developed by Bühler in terms of what we do in extrusion. So at Buehler, we also aim to provide solutions across the entire protein value chain, as you can see here. Starting right from the pulse seed, we do the intake, the cleaning, the dehulling, the grinding, the ingredients processing, all the way to protein isolation. And then we provide the equipment to do extrusion, to creating the actual product, be it dry, wet, or milk alternative products, which are plant-based. So to make these kind of products, you actually have two options for your plant-based texturized meat analogs. You can actually purchase them as dry tex or as high moisture extrudates, or what we call as wet tex. There are some disadvantages and advantages to both approaches. So for dry tex, this can be more easily bought as a raw ingredient. It can nicely absorb flavor during rehydration, and it can be stored at room temperatures and transported more easily. However, during processing, it needs to be dried. So you have to basically use a lot of energy to remove the moisture, only to put it back later. Whereas for wet tex, this is going to be the focus of this presentation. You can more easily get a very nice meat-like fiber structure and a lot more shapes and cuts that are possible. You won't need to dry it. You can just use it. You don't need to dehydrate it as well. And you can add slurries, and you don't have to worry as much about adjusting the moisture levels. But the downside here is that it's a lot more challenging to add flavors, and you would need to move the product long distances for further processing. So it's a lot more complicated because you will need a cold chain. So how does the process look like specifically for creating a dry tex meat substitute? So all the products you have, most of the products you have in the market right now are actually through dry. So you're beyond, your impossibles. They're all a form of mince. So you have your protein, and then you go through the process of dry mixing, dry pre-mixing, the extrusion process, cutting, drying, and then you have to do the rehydration, the flavoring, and then you actually have the formation of the product at the end. These are some interesting opportunities that we have managed to identify at Buehler, where we've taken up several upcycling opportunities where you're mixing the protein with other ingredients that create various textures, as you can see here. So mixing pea protein, for example, with walnut or with hemp, and we see a very interesting texturization from this. This slide here shows you a very nice overview of different shapes that you can create, and also the various methods that we use to create it, specifically for dry tex products. Now, when it comes to wet tex, the process is a lot simpler. It's somewhat simpler because you don't have the drying and the rehydration steps. And you also have the addition of a cooling dye, which I'll go into a bit more detail later on, to actually stabilize the fibrous structures that have been created. For products that are of wet tex, there are also several opportunities to valorize food side streams. So these are some of those that we have tried along with our collaborators, our research collaborations. So using apple pulp, using algae, using brewer's spent grain, using soy expeller cake. As you can see, you get different colors, different textures. So we're able to play around with this and develop a product that is of high nutrition, high taste quality. So the use of pulse is actually experiencing a huge boom for use in various forms of plant-based food products because they are high in protein. A life cycle assessment study recently showed that meat alternatives produced from pulses actually had a 50% lower environmental impact compared to chicken meat. And there are many different options and several suppliers, but the main ingredients that we use are basically wheat, soy, and pea. And there's several new sources that are expected to emerge over the next 5 to 10 years. Again, from the GFI, they've done some amazing work here where you can see a list of some emerging novel ingredients. Emerging plant proteins require a competitive value proposition to bring about growth. So to compete directly with wheat and soy, one major consideration is how well they texturize. So soy is a standard protein source currently, and we use it as a reference when we look into creating healthier, more innovative and locally sourced extruded products. So you see here a range of colors and textures with the use of different ingredients used with our extruders. So in terms of the production process, so basically extrusion is a process where one classic example could be a toothpaste tube where you apply pressure and you squeeze it out. So in extrusion, we have the same concept, but to use turning screws inside of a barrel to apply the pressure. And then you mix together the powder and the water. And then inside the extruder, you can actually mix the materials together, cook them to different temperatures, and then build up a pressure before the product exits the die at the end. So what happens inside the extruder? You have these barrels. And once the protein powder goes through, and with the input of heat, this helps to unfold the proteins, and that starts to align them. And then the protein melt enters the cooling die, the heat is removed, and these unfolded proteins begin to become solid. And that's when you have the formation of the different protein strands. And the cooling die actually allows it to cool down, so you have a more fibrous, more solid structure at the end of it. So in terms of innovations that we've built here at Bühler, one of the main things that we have in our extruder, which is a very interesting feature that we have, is a twin screw extruder. So here inside the barrel, we typically have 2 screws that are intermeshed with each other, and they rotate in the same direction. So depending on the type of elements, you can get more of a conveying effect or more of a mixing or shearing effect. We also have a range of different cooling dies from the 1000 kg per hour capacity all the way to 50 kg per hour capacity. And in our application center in Singapore, which I'll talk about in a bit, we have the 50 kg per hour capacity. So we are well known in this industry for more industrial scaling up of the products. So this is a really cool video, I think, of our smallest range in our cooling die. At the end of the extruder barrel, you actually have a sort of liquid melt, or like a dough. And then in most extrusion processes, it gets pushed out, and then you see a really nice texture that forms when it comes out. If the product is above 100 degrees Celsius, then it will actually expand as steam evaporates, and therefore you can control the product porosity. So this gives you also very nice texture, very nice flavoring once you put in your flavors too. One of the cool inventions that we have at Bühler, it was developed along with ETH, is the protein aeration technology. This is basically the injection of gas into the extruder to create a very microporous structure in the product. There are several advantages here, such as a lighter color, and in particular the presence of these pores helps to get all these marinade flavors inside the center of the texture. So it's not just flavoring the outside surface, but really the entire product. And we do see a huge difference also in the taste of this product. So going from raw materials to the final product requires a lot of steps. And really the goal of Bühler's processing experts is to help discover ways to improve efficiency each step of the way. So whether it's the entire process or just one, and as a highly purpose-driven company, we continue to invest a lot in R&D and innovation. And to support that transition into the growing demand for sustainable proteins, we've actually set up application centers globally and very key academic collaborations to really accelerate the applications for industry relevance. It's very important to note that these application centers, the way it's run, it's not set up for a profit kind of model. It's more to accelerate the emerging technologies in these areas. So the Protein Innovation Center in Singapore is the newest of the application centers we have. It opened last year. It's considered a playground for the food industry in APAC. It brings together Bühler's equipment and processing expertise, combined with Givaudan's flavor, taste, ingredient, and product development expertise. It really creates a very unique offering and synergy that we hope will be greatly advantageous to those developing new products. So scaling up their product, developing a prototype, particularly when using wet and dry extrusion. This is a little bit more about our application center here in Singapore, which I briefly went over just now, and the whole goal of this place is to be able to produce proof of concept prototypes with our joint expertise. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Aparna. That was fantastic. I'll just repeat again that Bühler is not running the center in Singapore for profit. So you're happy to run that as a loss to trial novel technologies and to help food companies to test things. Fantastic.
Yes, it's basically like a test bed.
Yeah,
for all your product formulations. Yeah.
Great. I have just a couple of questions for you, Aparna, and there's a few more on there that I won't be able to get to that you can look in and answer. And I see Shanae's busily answering the questions from before as well. You talked about some of the products that we're using byproducts, so the walnut going in, and there's a question around using byproducts of plant-based milks. Is that an area that Bühler has looked at, using some of the byproducts of oat milk or almond milk?
We have not done that here in Singapore, but I am aware that our colleagues in our headquarters in Utzville in Switzerland have. Yes, so that is definitely an area that we're interested in looking at, and we are currently looking at. That's right.
Good. And are you also looking at edible insects as part of the protein work in Singapore?
So at the moment, we're concentrating on insect for feed. Not to be feed, so not for human consumption, if that's what you meant. So we do support the scaling up of insect protein facilities, and this is also offered as a consulting service. So we have worked with countries like Netherlands and also France to build up industrial scale facilities for black soldier fly, for example. And we eventually hope to do more work in that in Asia, because we think this is going to be a huge focus area going forward.
Great, thank you. And I'll let you look at some of those other questions and answer those. Thank you, Aparna. I'll move on. So our final speaker tonight is Phil Mcfarlane, and hopefully Phil can turn on his camera and we can all see him. Phil is a co-founder and executive director of Australian Plant Proteins, APP. Phil grew up on a grain farm in Victoria's Wimmera Mallee region, and the family farm's still there today. And you've escaped the farm, sort of, Phil, not quite. You've you can never really leave, can you? APP was founded in 2016 and established its first production facility in Horsham in 2020 to capture the significant opportunity for Australia to play a key role in the supply of high quality plant protein food ingredients to meet global demand. APP produces protein isolate powders from pulses sourced from the Wimmera Mallee, and they have their own proprietary process to create highly functional, clean, great tasting proteins suitable for a range of applications. And Phil is responsible for APP's R&D, business operations, and developing its future assets and expansion strategy. And I'll just prime you, Phil, by Aparna's comments of this is the time to build, build, build.
Thanks, Darren, and it is. Thank you, everyone. See my slides here, and I think this presentation will have built on some of the sentiment from the previous presenters. So, presentation I'll cover off is a bit about what we do, which include a bit of our journey. So the question I asked is what sort of challenges that we faced when we took this concept business and from early stage concept right through to full production here in Australia and especially here in Horsham. A little bit about how we go about and make the product from farm gate all the way through to finished product. Some of the product that our ingredients go into currently, and the various streams that we're seeing opening up where our ingredients applied to many plant-based protein products and non-plant-based protein products. A little bit more into what the future is, and some numbers that we see growth that we're seeing for our partners, and then obviously like some key themes at the end that I'll wrap that up with. So I'll keep moving a short amount of time. Oops, sorry, make sure I can move here. I can't move. Oh yeah, I can. Sorry. Okay. Just for everyone, for based here in Australia, we're very much honing at the farm gate to take the raw material in pulses. This screen here just talks about all the pulses that we work with at the moment outside of lupin, which we're planning to later this year. But our role, we're a plant-based protein, we're a fractionator. We work with the raw material to go in and isolate the protein, and then dry it into a high-grade ingredient. So we're an isolate producer. So looking at that protein line, the starting point where it's been the low teens, high teens, mid-20s, taking that from that level, our technology and our IP, and we've got a combination of dry and wet processing that takes the protein level above 80%. And our process go into some of the attributes that make up the raw material and separate them out and allow that protein element to grow. Our product range to date, there's 5 really that's in the market at the moment that we've been able to develop. Fava bean on the left-hand side was our underlying sort of anchor protein powder to start with. Unit soy, and then you move into pea, and we're seeing alternative other pulses now being focused on. Fava bean, work with yellow pea, mung bean, which is growing really quickly, yellow lentil and red lentil. The key thing here is, if you look at the colour aspect, quite a neutral colour in many of them. And our processes for all those pulses there, we barely have to change any process to processes. When we work with chickpeas, it's something different, but one part of our business is to ensure that we have a one way, same way of continuous processing. As we move to different varieties for customers, it's little turnaround time in our production. Along the bottom there is some key labelling there. Obviously, claims for the vegan segment of the market, non-GMO, allergy-free, that we know with our pulses here in Australia, around the world, but how we do it here in Australia, gluten-free, etc. Are some of the key claims. Just diving a little bit deeper into our fava bean protein, as I mentioned in the earlier slide, fava bean basically starts around 27%. We take it as high as 88 to 90%. That's why we sit in the isolate section as opposed to concentrate. And the main move there, we were able to release and focusing on the carbohydrate as well as other aspects to get that high protein reading. More importantly, it's all about functionality for us, working with our clients when we sell them our ingredient. The key part of our offering is the flavour, odour and colour. We have a clean protein. We don't use enzymes to sort of move the protein around or to get it extracted. It's very much keep it as natural as possible. And obviously for food companies who apply to their product, there's little work on their end to adjust it, whether it be for flavouring or colouring or whatever, to give them a very natural colour go into their product. I suppose for Australia, our availability of raw material is key. We've got a whole abundance, a range of raw material and pulses across Australia. Would be the lentils, fava beans, chicks, mung, etc. So it's target rich to get access to basically pulses in Australia that really uses a break crop for wheat, barley and oats. And I think this is the exciting part for the grains industry. And as a farm boy growing up and going off and working corporates in finance, etc., always resting wheat, barley and oats when potentially the gold is all sitting in the pulses, which for sustainability does wonders for our soil in terms of injecting nitrogen and all that. So the end-to-end story is it's really unbeatable in terms of marketability. Just about our journey, and I'll move through this quickly. I suppose you've got to start somewhere, and back in 2016, we were working in another business in infant form at the time. Some of our big clients were talking about the rise of plant-based protein. I sort of walked out of those meetings and said, well, you all got brands and that, but where are you getting the ingredient? Well, who's going to make that? What's the manufacturing chain? How are you going back to farm gate? So we sort of then lurched into this market research. We had a concept, so we needed an environment to do some trials. After we'd spoken to some customers, said this is all great, but give us some samples and we can work with it. Went to CSIRO and over 18 months hired their facility and went in and out to run some particular trials to work on our engineering as well as product refinement. And that's a bit of the challenge. Is it's not CSIRO, it's just more so there's a lack of availability of R&D facilities to do your trials. How do you go from a concept and a PowerPoint deck to production? And you talk about raising capital, that no one will give you money for that. So I'm massive on R&D to the point in 2019 we found a disused site. There was an old R&D site. We re-kitted it out, and in the outskirts of Melbourne, Werribee, we kitted out our own research and development centre, which continued the trials. We run the trials daily. I have two full-time staff working there. And that does all our incubation for new product development, but more so engineering refinement for technology, for efficiency in processing, and to get those lab results so that we are getting a more purified product. We went to market to raise some capital, 2018 to 2019. No one would talk to us. They couldn't compare it, especially in Australia. After we'd been to America to see where the American market was moving, we came back to Australia and thought, it'll be easy to raise capital, and it wasn't. People couldn't compare us because there wasn't a fractionation facility in Australia, so to speak. Everyone was sort of a bit focused that it was all about vegans and the rise of alternative meat at the time too. So it was sort of, well, how do we do this? We finally overcame that. The facility I'm in here now, we've finished that build, started in late 2019. It came online in late 2020. Went 24/7 early in 2021. It's a first line factory line here in Horsham. Does 1,500 tonne a year annually of isolates. Why Horsham? This is a gateway in Victoria to where our pulses are grown from here all the way back into South Australia. So we were big on building our facilities where that customers could come to us and see where the farmers are too, have that real authentic feel of farm gate through the production facility. This year and next year, we'll build our second line right next door, which will be a 5,500 tonne annually to build. It's so the first line cost about $26 million to build. The second line's roughly 70. And then just recent announcements, we've been awarded some large funding from federal and the South Australian government to build our first, what we call mega site in South Australia that'll produce circa 25,000 metric tonne annually. So there's a lot going on and it's moved way quicker than I thought, but it's at the pace that it goes is something that we've got a working model to build production platforms that can hopefully somehow keep up with the demand. But our place is to build fractionation facilities and work with large customers to do so. Just on conversion, you might ask me, that's finished product. We're roughly a little bit under 5 to 1, so 5 tonne of pulses, a bit under 5 to 1 tonne of finished product. So you think of the value for farmers to what the pulses they grow now, but in the future to keep expanding their pulse production to meet our demand. Okay, just continuing quickly about how do we go and do it? As I touched on our R&D facility, very pictorial this presentation. That's what it looks like inside. We mimicked it to not produce the product, but our production process here to have it on pilot site. So we quickly turn over trials, work with customers to readjust the protein ingredient for their applications if required, or in a lot of instances, help them apply it to the many applications they need. We've really had to adjust what we produce, but if there's some colouring issues or some solubility, we can adjust sort of heat temperatures, etc., to get the powder right. So when they apply it, so this is absolute gold, and I'm sort of fascinated when people say R&D is lost leader. Lost leader, yes, but lost leader to develop a business. I'm not sure else how you do it. What we've built in our first line here in Horsham, sort of insights to internally to what we do. Obviously, can't walk you right through the detail given the IP locks on this, but it's a lot of shiny stainless steel. It's all food lock rooms, very much a combination of dairy equipment and what we've developed. And I said it runs 24/7. And then we obviously take the product back into Melbourne to ship it either domestically or internationally. Largely just looking at our value chain, I guess. I suppose we sit between the yellow lines there. And just quickly, we don't do the far right-hand part of this diagram. If you haven't picked up already, we're all about making 12.5 kg bags. That's as sexy as we get. As I said, it's isolates, it's over 80%, but from farm gate, from dehulling the skins, colour sorting, remove foreign objects and split the pulses, taking it into our fractionation facility. One of the beauty of working with pulses is the byproducts, that everything's recoverable, if you like, in a sense. With our water processing, and especially with our separation, you'll see the starch or carbohydrate on the bottom left-hand side, if I just circle it there. Basically separating that out. We basically, roughly every day, there's circa 26, 27 tonne that we send in from Victoria here into New South Wales to a feedlot who mix it into their cattle ration. So the carbohydrate is great for the digestibility for fattening up beefies. So we have a market for that. And then the right-hand side is after we're separating and the carbohydrate and other elements out of the beans, we can't just discharge the solids waste to the sewer. So we build our own dewatering or desalination plant where we separate the solids that come through our byproduct stream, and then we screw press those solids into a compost, which at the moment I have to pay someone to take it, but it has no contaminants. It has a natural petroleum in it. Someone will come to me shortly and say, I can get value from that, and we're all about that. So we need to concentrate on the protein, but good for the environment that we trap all the aspects and the typical waste streams, either recover it, and we have a recycling with water process in here to pipe back in the water once we've cleaned it up and reuse again, and then obviously into the bags is the finished good. I suppose just final point on this slide is the left-hand side is that as we build out this business, we're starting to have more and more close combinations with farmers about the varieties they grow, the things we're trying to solve, whether it be colouring, not the tannin on the beans, it might be the covicine, vicine that Faber has that we've been able to reduce by 93%. Working with them about the type of varieties they should be on. They've done many of it. Many of their varieties work perfectly, so we don't want to break what's not broken. But it's also start to work with them as partners. So they're in part of our value chain, and therefore we can price and reward them for the continue growing great quality pulses. How do we get to market? And I'll just touch on, as I said earlier on, we decided not to be a brand in the shelf or in the supermarket, and we'll provide the ingredient and let everyone else have that. To do that, we decided to partner up with two companies, Scalzo's here in Australia, who have the distribution rights across Australia and New Zealand, and then Bunge, which is a large American listed company, they have the distribution rights to the Americas. Other countries or businesses in other countries can come directly to us. They're as minority shareholders, helping us to grow, given that they felt that it was faster to buy in with us rather than develop themselves. So that was nice for us, but working with partners, it saved us, particularly having legs on the ground to move the product around the globe, especially in the last 2 years where the markets have been locked. So having both domestic and international partners has helped us get traction to move our product through. These next slides is just where our ingredients have been applied to various products in the market. And I suppose one of the key messages here, there's a wide range of products our ingredient goes into. Being an isolate, we're a lower application into multiple products. We're not the big bulky, well, companies are happy to, the big bulky ingredient to make their product. We tend to be the high protein injection, clean tasting, no smell and small application, but a much wider variety of product range. So here, where it be pancake mixes and custards and puddings, and then something like Coles did here is just simply take a powder and put it in a bag and say, there it is for making cakes and for bakery, peanut butter, etc. So there's a range in the powder mixes. Then you have the high-end nutritional well-being. So healthy, wealthy-wise, great for mind, body, and soul. They're a great category. The meat alternatives, of course, we obviously work with a number of meat alternative companies, but beef use our product. Then we have plant-based eggs. So it's been touched on, particularly with our mung. And then we're seeing companies working with mixing our mung and faba bean to have egg replacement. So you have a very hydrate mung, you get that very much an egg colouring as added into their product. So that's a pretty exciting area for us. You get traditional protein bars that you see religiously in outlet stores. And then we have the dairy alternatives. And I think people said there's always this war between dairy and meat companies and us. Well, some of our biggest clients are dairy companies and meat companies. In particular here on the left-hand side, Domino Pizzas here in Australia, the vegan mozzarella cheese, our faba bean ingredients in that. So that's highly popular. And you have your sour creams, your dairy products, Greek yogurts, etc. And then you have your vegan range. Coles is one of the fastest selling around your vegan mayonnaise, etc. Very popular. You can see the colouring, how our faba bean and lentil and that, the yellow pea and that can go in that quite easily. So pretty much mainstream products. Moving through, what's the future? And it's been touched on with other presenters too, that choice and necessity. People are balancing up their diets between livestock source protein and plant-based. And they want that choice. They don't want to be compromised by it. They don't want to be pushed and shoved so they can have one and not the other. And many are doing that. So that's one thing. World population's been touched on. And sustainability, which is coming up over. When we started this in 2016, I suppose, was outside the top 10 that came up. It's really in the top 3 now and will be number 1. And it's really, I suppose, and I'll talk about themes in a minute about pulses grown here in Australia with farmers, low rainfall, dry cropping, all the way through to recovering all the byproduct and sustainably producing the ingredient is certainly a big market now to how your food is getting measured. Right through to customers in Europe are saying in 5 years, don't use fossil fuel gas to dry your product, be on renewable. And we see that coming through. So that's really great for design for me going forward, because I can build that right into our designs and make sure that we don't have to retrofit in latter years. I just want to touch on this a little bit at the gap. I suppose what we said, and I sort of don't want to bombard the talk with all the numbers, but really from, and it's a little bit of that, from 2020, looking at our areas, I suppose comparing with soy, where the soy protein concentrate, soy protein isolate, and then the emergence of pea and other legumes, which where we sit, and where that's going to be now from 2020, 2022, right up to 2030. And that's sort of just touching on Aparna's sort of stats there also, we're seeing likewise. The interesting part here for us is you've got these avenues here where you've got demand and a tonnage, finished product that is, and the capacity that's available to produce that. And then over on this side, the demand or what it's going to be in 10 years' time. So even in just these categories, there's something like 780,000 tonne that needs to be produced to fill the gap, let alone meet the growth, if you like. So that's pretty exciting without talking about wheat and all the rest of it. So even with the category we're in, building capacity, it's 256,000 tonne now to get to 575. And some of those volumes I talked earlier on, time I finish building here in Horsham and South Australia, that's roughly $31,000, 31,000 tonne, I should say, for best part of a $400 million investment. Now that 31,000 tonne is not a big thing to move the demand gap of 319,000 tonne just in our category, along with some of the soy protein customers may move into our category or use a bit of each. We need to get on our bike and build capacity, especially in Australia. And I suppose working with Bunge, they like the fact we're positioned in Australia to service them, which is not normally something that Australian food businesses are pitched for, but for the variety we are, to service Europe, to service Asia, and Asian customers are now starting to flow through now, but we're already servicing mature markets. And I think that's a good position to be in for Australia. We're positioned, we've got multiple pulses, plenty of growth aspects. We need to build the capacity, but we also need to pick the point in the supply chain where we need to play sensibly, and let's not get run over by being sort of too much like other areas maybe, if I should say that. So I think we're skilled enough to do it. So key themes, I suppose, R&D is king, and it's just not all the scientific, it's combining the engineering that take to turn around trials in a short, rapid amount of time to get the responses and keep customers on their toes. We're also getting involved with their product development. Well, they ask us, where else can we apply this? In a milk, in a biscuit, cooking, protein balls, all those sort of things. So I think the door is opening with food companies who want you to come inside the tent. Usually they'd leave you at the front gate and said, we'll let you know if you need your product. Now they're asking us to come in and say, can you help us sort of develop a little bit and how the product's performing inside wet, dry, cooking type products. So that's pretty exciting. Pick your point in the supply chain. As I said, where we've made the point that we'd stop at a certain point and be very good at that and minimize variation, because others are really good at other parts further downstream than us. And we want to get leverage off where the farmers are who grow really great, clean pulses. It's all about functionality, having clean protein, no smell, no taste, easy to apply, gets great turnaround, gets great results quicker. Multi-application, much as creating isolates and waiting for customers to come back is a bit of or making them in the first place is the process, but they have a period of time too, which is a challenge, 8 or 9 months to apply it, then go to their customers and then wait for them to approve it, then come back. That all takes time. But the point is it's sticky. Kind of in a way, they get the product right and your isolate works, you are their strategy. They're gonna be really reluctant to throw you out for 10 cents cheap for someone else and they've just spent 12 months or 8, 9 months working with your isolate. So I think that's important for us. I'm not saying that will always be the way, but you work in real partnership. You don't need to compete. And we work with the concentrate guys too. Make a concentrate, well, some of those companies need a dash of isolate. So it's not like these barriers, like we all have these, don't come near us. It's actually in the horizontal and working together. That's where we see it going anyway. High levels of automation. Our plan here is not resource intense. It's not your traditional factory. It's a lot of monitoring and analytics, more control rooms. Some of our staff say they get bored. So we want to automate it as much, let machineries and technology keep the control on the product. You get that consistency through, minimal variation, minimal breaking, but you need to invest. You won't get it on the cheap. You'll get it wrong. And as soon as a customer gets the wrong ingredient, you'll get dumped. Sustainability. touched on it, water management, renewable energy, off fossil fuels. But Australian farmers have been growing pulses sustainably for decades. In the millennium drought, lentils alone doubled. They can grow them in lower rainfall, less moisture, but they were growing it to protect their wheat and barley, whereas we can grow them and reward them for that. So we have a great sustainability story for our pulses from farm gate all the way through to ingredient, and working a lot closer with the food customers, how they want to apply it, not just here in Australia, but internationally. I've probably gone over my bit there, Darren, but happy to take any questions, or I'll finish there.
Great, thank you very much, Phil. That was fantastic. Most of the questions are just saying what a great presentation. So I'm trying to just go through those. I do acknowledge we are just over 5 o'clock, so I'll just ask a couple of easy ones for you, Phil. There's a couple that might take a bit longer. Whereabouts will the new facility be in South Australia, and what pulses will go into that facility? Is it many or just a single pulse?
Yeah, so to answer the latter one, we'll build 3 individual lines that'll do 8,000 tonne each, and they'll have a minimum of 3 varieties. So whether it be fava beans or with a variety of lentils or yellow pea, putting different, one of those lines will have separated to our chickpeas. But South Australia, like Victoria, grow similar variety of pulses. It'll be basically located, and I haven't, but the main leader is straight north of Adelaide, where we can get access to the Yorke Peninsula, where the bulk of the pulses are. I can get keep near, I can get a workforce and access into the port. So roughly, if you think North Adelaide, but sort of out on in the regional area, not just on the outer rim of Adelaide. It needs to be out regional, keep with our principles of closer to the farmers.
Great. And is everything you're processing being grown in Australia, or do you import product to process?
Everything here in Australia. The only thing I've got outside an 80k radius of here in Horsham in Victoria is mung beans we bring down from southern Queensland for our mung product. That's it. Nothing comes in internationally.
And the last question, it might take a bit too long, but I'll probably see Tony Gendel when I walk across campus at some point. Are there desirable traits that you need in the pulse crops before you process them? Is there a trait that needs to be bred in?
Not where pulses are as they are at the moment, no. I suppose, and I'll preface that by saying, even at second grade, we want them to, because the protein says intensify when the pulse is stressed. So there's nothing, obviously, anything that's gone black or burn off or frosted, it gets sorted out. But there's nothing, that's from my earlier statements about, they've been scientifically developed to battle with disease and sort of lack of moisture and frost and all the rest of it. It's sort of, we're surfing off the great work that scientists have done and agronomists with the farm and soil management. I think there's a couple of varieties that we're working with where tannin free, or the Covatin Visine, which is more into the variety that we can work on. I think Australia can get a lead on that. But I actually like the process where I don't really look at the variety, because they all perform very, very similar, which is great. But they all have a story.
Great, thank you. There are some other questions there you might want to answer that are in the list there, Phil, and we'll share I think the questions come up when we share the response later on with everybody. Thanks very much, Phil, that was fantastic. And just before I end today, Deb, I think you've got one presentation just to talk about quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. Hi, I'd just like to introduce myself. I'm Deb Krauss. I'm the CSIRO part of the collaboration with La Trobe, putting together all these webinars. And look, I'd really like to thank my colleague Shanae Golly and our industry partners, Phil from APP and Aparna from Beulah, for their presentations today. I know it's taking time out of your busy schedules to do this, but thank you. And just wanted to let you know we have a Protein Futures conference coming up in June in Brisbane. So you can either attend, it's a 2-day conference that you can either attend face-to-face, which we would love to see everybody again, or if you're unable to attend face-to-face, there is an online option as well. this conference will cover off all protein types, as sort of shown by the image there. We're sort of not focusing on plant, but we'll be focused, there'll be meat, aqua, and both human and animal presentations as well. Yeah, so go to our CSIRO events page for further information, and registrations are opening next week. So thanks, Darren.
Great, thank you very much, Deb. And so thank you to everybody for your attendance today. We have some contact details here, and feel free to reach out to any of the presenters. I know there were a lot of questions we didn't have a chance to get to. We look forward, CSIRO and Trobe, of hosting further agriculture and food events over the course of this year, and we welcome any suggestions from you of the areas that you'd like to hear more about. The response today has been fantastic, and as you can see, the presenters were just incredible today. So thank you again, Phil and Aparna and Shanae. It was a really interesting session, and with that, I shall call the webinar to a close. Thank you.